So, to give a kind of a brief background, I don't need to talk about those pieces. Like that was the aftermath of finding rugby, right? I view this as like the gravy on finding a community that is the women's rugby and the rugby collective world. So, kind of my history. I, like many American rugby players, did not start playing rugby until I was in college. I started my first year of college at the University of Virginia. Before that, I had been a basketball player, soccer player, field hockey player, football player, you know, like all the other sports. To be fair, I played most of those other sports like I play rugby. So I got my fair share of cards in soccer, and I fouled out of my fair share of basketball games. So it was probably a good thing I found rugby in college. I found rugby in college a bit on accident. I went to the wrong field. I was trying to find the club soccer tryouts, and there were 2 different fields, and I wound up at the wrong one. And so I showed up, and I was like, "Oh, is this club soccer?" And they're like, "No, this is rugby," you know. And they took kind of one look at the sides of me, and they're like, "Have you ever thought about rugby?" And I was like, "I don't really know what it is, but sure, why not? I'm here." And it's too late for me to get all the way across campus. And so I started playing rugby. And initially, as I think many people are, I wasn't very good. You know, the whole concept of passing the ball backwards, all that stuff, it wasn't great. But I had found this community that like did not care. They you know, they cared and they wanted me to get better, but they didn't care in that they were welcoming me in, and they were, you know, it didn't matter, you know, whether I was 5'1", 90 pounds, or 5'10", 200 pounds, or any range in between. Like that the team had that spectrum, and it was such an eye-opening experience. As generally a larger female athlete, to come into this space where you know, they'd be like, "You weigh 200 pounds, that's amazing," right? Versus, you know, spending a lot of time with anxiety growing up, you know, because of my size and kind of the general socialization that happens to girls around the world, but pretty badly in this country. So it was such an eye-opening experience that I was like, "Soccer, what's that?" Right? And I got hooked. And you know, now playing rugby, well, I stopped playing in 2014, but having played rugby for 17 years, I, you know, traveled the world. I met so many different people. And when I look at the women that I played with, both in college and then in the club levels and beyond, right? You know, I can name, you know, generals in the military. I can name military colonels, platoon leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, principals, you know, these just incredibly accomplished women, you know, and a lot of that, you know, I do think there's a bit of this chicken and the egg, like who gets drawn to rugby and then what does rugby do to you, kind of in the process. But when I look at that, you know, you just see this accomplishment that comes, and a lot of that I think is being in this environment with these incredibly confident, strong, willful women, right, who challenge you as a person, and you have to learn how to really address adversity, how to be strong in contact, right? We always talk be strong in contact, right? Contact can be physical in the rugby game, but it can also be metaphorical in life, right? Life's gonna come at you with some contact, and you've gotta figure out how to like sort of get your way through it, wrestle your way through it, hold on to the ball, keep going forward. And that metaphor, I think, plays itself out in so many of the women that I see who have played rugby. And so that's what I got hooked on. And it just happened to be that I had some really good coaches and, you know, improved and got better over time. And it took me to some really, really incredible places. But I always say that, like, you know, kind of all the accolade pieces that happened, like, it was really rugby itself that was the starting point for that. You know, I didn't start playing rugby because I had some grand ambition. I started playing rugby because I got to be surrounded on a daily basis by these incredibly powerful, strong women, and I was like, I want to be like them, so I want to surround myself with them, so sign me up. And that's one of the things I see, the value I see in rugby. And one of the values I see particularly in high school rugby and even middle school rugby. And one of the reasons why, you know, when Angus and I started talking, even several years ago, before I was sort of in a place where I could start coaching more fully for the high school program, I was like, yes, I want to be a part of that because I didn't get access to that till I was 18. And I would have loved to have had that community, as a high schooler, as a middle schooler. So that's why I'm taking on the role. That's why rugby for me, amongst many other pieces. But yeah, so I would love to open it up to, any questions you might have, the good, the bad, the ugly, both around rugby in general, but also the, this, particularly the premise of this, which is, rugby for girls by women, to kind of talk about what that looks like.
Don't be shy, otherwise I will pick someone.
That third row's ready.
Oh.
There we are, back in the room, please.
Yep.
Jamie, what's your role now with the? Are you coaching the Merlins?
So the WPL side, yeah, I'm one of the coaches for the WPL Merlins. So that's the Glendale team has a Women's Premier League team and a Division I team. The Women's Premier League team plays in the fall, and the Division I team plays in the spring. I'm one of the coaches for that fall side. Yeah. Yep.
What was the most unexpected thing about playing for a national side?
I would say the most unexpected thing is it's both I think it's a great testament to the women in the sport was the degree to which people wanted to make each other better all the time. Because you read sort of like horror stories of the competition, like I'm vying for this position against you, and this sort of like underhandedness that can happen in other sports. And I, at least in my position, I didn't experience that. In the forwards, it was a lot of, you know what, you're better than me, let me help make you even better. Or we're both going for the same spot, I beat you on that last scrum, here's how I did it so you can fight me off next time, right? Because in a lot of ways, US rugby, like we want to collectively raise the whole ship, right? Me making myself a phenomenal player at the expense of, shoving other players down does not do anything for the state of women's rugby in the US. And so I think that was something that I always found really refreshing. Going to camps, yes, it's super competitive. Yes, you're, knocking each other down and you're really going after each other, but you're going after each other with this ultimate goal of making everyone collectively better.
Jamie, did you always play for elite teams, or did you play for clubs that were down, where you had newbies mixed in and someone who maybe never played before starting on a side at some point, even alongside you? What was your club experience? I assume, and I may be assuming wrongly, that you've always played in elite. You sought out clubs that were top level, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I started at UVA at Virginia in my first year, and so I was that player who was like, here's Mr. Rugby Ball, and so Mrs. All throughout that. And many college players will experience this. It's like this constant turnover of players. So there's generally going to be new players that you're introducing to the game. And I think that, I've been on a couple of different programs where we've had that exposure to a lot of new players. And I think the places that it's been most successful have been ones that have a really strong development mindset to be able to bring up those players and kind of get them into the sport fully. So after I finished at UVA, I went to DC and played for the DC Furies, and then I was out at Berkeley, and so both of those are high performing teams. Although Berkeley has has a lot of players, and so they have their A side, B side, and C side. So you have some C side players who have legitimately never seen a ball. They've never played. I can remember when I played for the Furies. So this would have been in 2000, that when I was playing for them, one of our brand new players who came out, she'd been a basketball player in college, and we kind of met her out about, and like, we're like, you should come play rugby. She had no clue, had never seen anything remotely rugby related. Came out, started getting it, we played on the B side, started getting into it, slowly progressed her way over the course of time, ultimately wound up moving out to Berkeley, and some of you might recognize her name of Natalie Marquino, who used to play for the US and then played for Colombia in the Olympics, right? She started playing rugby at 27, right? When I was playing out for DC. So, I think that there is always this growth opportunity. I went to Raleigh when my partner was in grad school, and the Raleigh Venom was a Division II team. So I was like, well, this is the team that's here. Guess this is who I'm going to play for. And I think that one of the things that comes up when you start playing higher level rugby is you start to then become your own biggest challenger and critic, right? So there were things I could have gotten away with playing on a Division II side that I had to hold myself to a higher standard to make sure. And we actually had this mantra that we used with the national team. That we would challenge each other when we were playing club matches against each other, right? Be always an eagle, right? So even when you're playing for your club side, even when you're at the gym, even when you're running those last sprints, you're always an eagle. So no one's watching, that doesn't make you not an eagle. So that's sort of the mantra to be able to keep yourself pushing yourself, even when you're playing either higher level or on some of those lower level clubs. Yep.
You touched earlier on some of the networking that you learned from meeting all these people. Can you touch upon maybe how that's affected your life, maybe professionally outside of rugby, or through the people you've met in the rugby community? Has it helped your careers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say there are a couple of different places. Like they're both on the networking social side and then on the networking kind of professional and career side. When I was my senior year of college, I had kind of got a little bit of the travel bug, and so I wound up taking my fall semester of my senior year of college off from school and was like, I'm going to go backpack around Europe, as many kind of 20-year-olds think this is what I'm going to do. And so I went over there, and at that point I hadn't been, I've been playing college rugby, but I didn't really have any credential behind me or anything like that. And I just reached out to some of the rugby teams that were there. I reached out to a team in Edinburgh, and I was like, hi, I'm coming to town. Can I, come out to practice just so I can kind of keep my hands on the ball? And, they were like, sure. And so, they're like, we'll pick you up at the train station when you get in and bring you to practice. And so I show up, with my big backpack on. They take me to practice. I practice with them. They're like, oh, where are you staying? I was like, oh, I haven't got a place yet. I'm thinking about this hostel. They're like, no, you'll just come stay at my place, right? And so I went and stayed at their place, and then I wound up playing with them throughout the course of my time when I was in Europe, because they would like send me an email and say, hey, we're going to this tournament, that's going to be just outside Amsterdam, a TENS tournament. Do you want to, come join us? I was like, I'm in Germany. Sure, I'll come on over, right? And so there was this sense of community, and it had zero to do with me being an international player, because at that point, all I was a rugby player, right? But there was this sense of camaraderie and community. So that was something that just always has struck me. I feel confident that I could go to any city in most of the world, and definitely anywhere in the US, and drop a line to the local club and say, hey, I'm coming to town, can I either come pick up at practice, does anyone know of someone who's got a spare room they're looking to rent, anything like that. And I think that sense of community is something that many people have experienced in rugby, and I think it's opened a lot of opportunities, because I don't have this same fear, like, what am I going to do when I get there, right? And that applies similarly to, I said I moved to Berkeley, and there's a whole network of folks out there where I said, hey, I'm moving out there. Can you help, me find a place? And, I'm perfectly happy to work for minimum wage. I just need something so I can get my feet under me. And, there's Title IX Sports is like the rugby haven out there of it's like where wayward players go to work for 4 months until they get a job in their field. And it's awesome, right? It's super open, but it's part of that network. My job I have now is 100% because of rugby. rugby. The position I have, the woman who had the role before me played rugby for Black Ice. For those of you who are familiar with kind of local Denver rugby, she was moving to the East Coast, and she had posted, on Facebook, "Hey, leaving my job, my position's going to be opening up." And I said, I read the job description. I was like, I could be perfect at that. Can you put in a good word for me, right? And she did, and I wound up getting an interview and getting that role position. But it's similarly this like connections and communities and then this ability to find these relationships. Yeah.
So as we try to grow this from the ground up in some cases in our community, what are some of the challenges and the stigmas that we have to overcome to make this successful and sustainable?
I mean, I think one of the biggest ones we're gonna have to wrestle with, and I think Brian can speak to this a little bit, would be this assumption that rugby is like this hugely injurious sport, right? It's a sport because it's a contact sport. It comes with all these additional injuries, and really, like it doesn't play out that way. As I say, I'm on crutches because of soccer, right? But I think we're gonna have to figure out a way to communicate that effectively, particularly to folks who don't have a lot of exposure to rugby, so that we can explain like what the sport is. What are the actual risks? We have plenty of kids playing American football, and there's a ton of risks there, and that just seems to be a given. Versus, people are like, "Oh, I could never let anyone I know play rugby," and you're like, do you know the background of it? So I think that's going to be kind of a big piece, especially as we try and get sort of into the younger ages, getting them into rugby. And I think we're doing a really good job as we start getting more flag rugby opportunities and more touch rugby opportunities, because I think it then highlights the grace and the poise of the sport and gets away from kind of the smash ball that I think people kind of associate with it when we just immediately think of it. Yep.
How would you recommend somebody that knows absolutely nothing about rugby learn anything about rugby?
Get a rugby ball in your hand and go play. I mean, I say that slightly facetiously, but part of it is, and a couple of the folks in our group too mentioned it, and I did the same thing. There's a ton of information out there from a YouTube perspective. There's also just going and watching the game. Like going and watching the game, people who play rugby and people who watch rugby really like rugby, and they really like talking about rugby. So often if you are just standing next to them at a field and you say, "Why'd they call that?" they will give you literally the entire background of like the law history, why it happened, what the strategy of it was, all this stuff. And so I think that, so there's definitely this taking advantage of the fact that rugby does have that culture and that community about it. And then watching rugby as much as you can, because you start to figure it out and you start to learn it. Once you kind of get the basic rules, then you can start piecing the other parts together. Yeah.
What would be your best advice for a young girl who's going through high school looking to play like college ball? I
would say two pieces. One, take as many opportunities to learn the game as possible. I went to when I was first starting to play, I went to all sorts of random rugby camps. Some of them were good, some of them were bad, but each one of them I learned something different. And I learned because there's different coaches, there's different coaching styles, and so I was able to sort of glean little bits of information from that. I would say also for someone who's looking to play in college, would be to start thinking about that earlier rather than later, not in terms of actually like the sport itself, but thinking about like what do you need to do to like be a good candidate for college in general, not necessarily just as a rugby player, right? Because rugby is going to like bring someone up and above, but only if they're at whatever the bar is set for that school. Especially right now where we're still some schools have scholarships, some don't. So really thinking about like, well, what do we need to do as students to be good students for going into college and then being able to play rugby there. And I know that for anyone who's, and it'll be open to everyone if it gets gone out, but on May 12th, we have one of our practice days for the high school all-state team. But Karen Fong Donahue, who runs Rugger's Edge, will be doing a session for students and athletes, students and parents, right? hopefully they're both students and athletes, for athletes and parents to be able to ask questions of like, what things should I be considering? How do I approach like thinking about college recruitment? She's just a wealth of information about that. So they'll be doing a session on the 12th for that, so that parents and athletes can ask these questions and say like, when do I take the SAT? Like, do I need to do this? Like, should I be taking AP classes? Like, do I need to go to this kind of thing? And she can really expand on that. She just has a wealth of knowledge about all that stuff.
And actually, just to speak to that really quickly, the colleges have some really great camps to go to. I know Life has one, I think Penn State has one, I think Dartmouth has one. They're really great, and even if they don't want to go to that school, but they're interested in checking out the college life and the college system, they can get some really great training, have some really great experiences, and meet some people in those environments.
And it's also a great way to get some exposure if you are looking to get potentially recruited, depending on what level you're talking about playing at, because a number of us coaches coach at those college camps. You know, there's a lot of rules, especially the schools that are NCAA schools, about like when they can make contact with players, who they can talk to, when they can start having any of those conversations. You know, and so being able to go to a camp where the Life camp where the coach of Dartmouth is actually coaching at the Life camp with the Life coaches, you're like, all right, well, I get double exposure. You know, so there's lots of opportunities to learn more and also kind of get exposed to all these different opportunities. And you also then get a chance to be able to see what they're like as a coach before you actually commit to going and being coached by them for 4 years potentially. You're like, oh no, that coaching style's not going to work for me. Or yeah, I really, really like felt like that was the way to work. So, yep.
One is I was wondering what your opinion is on the concussion helmets, that they wear.
Scrum caps?
Yeah, is that what they're called?
Yeah.
But I mean, you talked about safety or people thinking that rugby is really dangerous, and the one I worry about really, my daughter plays is concussion. I mean, she plays soccer, and she's had broken bones, she's broken her collarbone, she skis, she's had lots of injuries, but concussion is what I worry so much about. And I wish that if everyone just had to wear them, then it would be a little easier for people to wear them.
Yeah, I would probably defer a little bit of that over to Brian, although I don't know that we would call them concussion hats. They're more like keep your ears attached hats. Yeah, and like stop major abrasions kind of hats.
So not really
keep your ears on type of hat.
Yeah.
Sadly, otherwise our whole team would have been had them.
So there's not.
It's a misconception with helmets and head safety, and a lot of the studies that come out.
Brian, just to sort of root clear. So Brian's our medical coordinator, and I was hoping to save that question to the welfare piece. But
Sorry.
if you want to speak,
I mean, we can come back to it at the very end there, but yeah, there's a little bit of a misconception. We can go on to it in detail a little bit later. If
Brian's going to talk to player welfare in a later segment. If you don't mind.
There is hope, though.
There is
a lot of hope, and it's about how you play it and how you go after it.
My other question was just about the difference between sevens and 15s. It looks like sevens is what the Olympic sport is going to be. But in college, are most of them 15s, or are they?
They usually play both. So most places will play both. They'll have like a spring sevens and they'll have a fall 15s. It really depends on where the college is and which conferences they play in and that type of thing. But they have many of the schools play both of them, and they find as with a lot of the research that's come out that says like, focusing on one sport too early in life is actually not good from an athletics perspective. It's actually way better to play multiple sports, to play soccer in one season and basketball and then rugby and this, as opposed to like just being year round, because you just develop different coordination. The same thing applies to sevens and 15s. Is people who play sevens tend to like play 15s better, and vice versa, right? Because people who play 15s, they get a really better sense of like how their body goes in contact, how to sort of take up and be more physical. And sevens, there's so much space, so they have to have better ball control and better ball movement. So when you're able to kind of combine the strengths of both of those into one player, it can actually boost their game overall. Some of us are not necessarily meant physically to play sevens, but I still did it. It was very painful, but I still did it, right? And it was great for my fitness. and really helped me also to see space on the field, even though, like, it was not necessarily going to be a thing that I was going to excel at. It still boosted my 15's skills.
So I'm going to be a bit of a killjoy, I'm afraid. Restrict it to maximum 2 more questions. We are on a little bit of a time crunch.
Yep.
But at the end of this, we obviously have a networking opportunity. If you do want to ask more questions informally, there is that time. So who would like to ask a question about, nice segue, thank you very much. Sorry, what's your name?
Oh, Susie.
Susie, nice segue, thank you, into actual what the game is, or how to play the game, or anything you saw on the game that you'd like further explanation.
Yep.
What are the sort of available, or the different sports? So you've mentioned 7s and 15s, and then you briefly mentioned 10s. What does that mean for kind of the novice? And I noticed, when watching rugby that there are only certain numbers, right? Like 1 through 15. And when you watch any other sport, there's like 97 and 22 or whatever. And that isn't the case in rugby. Could you go into that a little bit, please?
Yeah.
Just for basics.
Yep. Yeah, so the numbers when you're describing types of rugby is basically the number of players that are on the field. So 7s, 7 players on the field, 10s, 10 players on the field, 15s, 15 players on the field. And they have slight variations in the way that they're played. 7s has 7-minute halves on a full-size field, hence why it is so exhausting, right? 10s you're missing, basically, you got sort of a mini scrum. I mean, like bigger than a 7 scrum, but still a mini scrum. And it's different iterations and different adaptations also that you wind up making to be able to also to play depending on where you're at. And then 15s is what we think of as kind of traditional rugby union, right? Which is our 15 aside. When we look at those numbers, in 15s it goes 1 through 15, and then your substitutions are 16 through 23, and those are positionally based. So unlike other sports where it's like you get your name on your back and it's like your number, right? Your number is your position, right? So I was always a 1 or a 3, or a 16 or a 17 when I was on the bench, right? Like those were my numbers, right? So I was like, yes, that's my number, right? But there was no guarantee that that's what I was going to wear on any given day or on any given game, right? It was based on what you were rostered. If you were rostered to start, then I'd be in a 1 or a 3. If I was on the bench, I'd be in 16 or 17. And so you can kind of tell where someone plays by the number that's on their back when you're looking at kind of a rugby field, which is different than well, I guess in football you still have your numbers are associated with your position, but it's like your number is your number versus like the number is of the players. Right. One last question. Just cut that.
What's the difference between union and league?
It depends on your perspective on what the difference is. So rugby union is what we were watching here, where it's tackle happens, a ruck forms, you clear out, and ball keeps playing off of that. In rugby league, there's not when the tackle happens, there's not a breakdown. Instead, you have, to use kind of Americanized terms, you have downs, right? You have a certain number of downs to compete in. I mean, it's still live. There's no like pause or break and play, but there's not this competition for the ball. It's, I tackle you, your team still has the ball. There's not this vying for it. You play another down, and then you basically, and so it's just a different mode of playing rugby. There'll be a rugby league game here happening at Sports Authority Field, right? Mile High. Oh yeah, I guess Sports Authority no longer exists. Mile High. Yeah. But yeah, so it's a little bit of a different version, but they're still both rugby. They just have slightly different variations. Most of the time, when most people are thinking, particularly in the U.S., are talking rugby, they're traditionally talking rugby union, by and large. Okay? Yeah. I will be around afterwards, so we turn it back over to Angus. But,